Well, for a view on the expenses controversy, I'm joined now by Fmr Government Minister Peter Reith. He's with me live from Melbourne. Peter Reith, good morning. What do you think about the attention this is gaining at the moment, this expenses controversy?
I think it's a reflection on the fact that politics is not as entertaining as it was under Labor, and a few in the press have decided to kick some of the coalition members, and they've evened it up by having a go at Bernie Ripple, who doesn't seem to have breached any rules whatsoever. In the same way that I don't think any of the coalition people have either.
You say this is petty. How could attending a wedding be reasonably regarded as something a politician should be paid for?
Joe, if you knew anything about politics, you'd know it's very easy to do so. And the fact is, it's quite a compliment for somebody to be invited to a wedding of which, which involves some of their colleagues. And you might be. I was once invited and went to a wedding in Melbourne of a very senior person in the business community in Melbourne, and I had to deal as a minister a lot with the business community on workplace relations. And look, as a minister, you are 24/7 a minister. There's no such thing as ministers who are, time off basically, unless it's the annual holiday for a week or so. I mean, this is all just part of being a politician. If you get an invitation to go to a private occasion, then the judgment you make as a minister is this worth it from a political point of view? And that's why it is political. Getting to know someone on a personal, intimate basis can be a very important part of what you do as a politician. And to deny politicians the right to get around the country as they deem fit in the pursuit of their activities as politicians, I think is silly. I think it's petty. Cars, for example. I mean, apparently this is now in the part of the discussion. I mean, for most ministers, their car, or shadow ministers, their car is part of their office. Now, to say if someone goes to a wedding by car, I can guarantee you they'd spend half of the time on the phone talking about politics, policy issues, or whatever it is, all part and parcel of what they do.
Okay, well, what about going to a fellow MP's wedding?
Well, I think that's, again, I mean, getting to know someone who's a member of the Parliament, you mightn't have had much of a chance.
You've got as much of a chance of getting to know them while you're in Parliament rather than going to their wedding.
Well, that's your experience. But you see, the truth is you don't have experience as being an MP. And as an MP, to go to somebody's electorate, to have the compliment of being invited, to a family occasion is an important way in which you can connect with somebody. But it's not just weddings. I mean, where are you going to draw the line and who's going to manage this? And I can tell you who's going to manage it. It's the Department of Finance, and they couldn't run a chook raffle.
But why can't you just do it in Parliament? If it's a fellow MP, why couldn't you sit down them at their office in Parliament, have a chat to them in Parliament? Why should the taxpayer pay for you to go interstate to their wedding?
Well, the basic proposition is that people are saying, or you're suggesting, that what you can do as an MP and what you can't do should all be set down in a set of rules, that those rules will then be presumably managed by the Department of Finance. So take somebody, for example, going to a wedding. I've already mentioned the use that they might have of the car in pursuit of their various duties. But it's not just that. I mean, you then get into a situation where MPs have to advise some department who they've seen, when they've seen, and what they've discussed. Now, I think that's just totally unacceptable. MPs should not have to respond to the bureaucrats. The ultimate response about all this has to be, the sensible treatment of these expenses, cars and flights, by MPs and the public, and in the end, their colleagues will, determine what sort of person they are. And can I just make one last final point too? I mean, the vast majority of Australian politicians, I know it's not, acceptable or part and parcel of what people say, but the vast majority of Australian politicians are decent people, and they don't need to be, pushed around by the age as they've done in the front page today.
Well, maybe it's just a matter of having clear rules then.
There are no such thing as clear.
There could be a clear rule saying you can't claim on weddings. So taking your argument to its through its natural course then, wouldn't it be appropriate for a police officer, say a public servant, attending the wedding of a colleague interstate to claim that on the...
Well, it's got nothing to do with...
To claim that on the public purse, because he's talking to other police officers at the wedding about policing.
Well, that's just nonsense.
Why,
I mean,
why is that any
well,
different?
let's have a real example. Julie Bishop was invited to, and others are invited to a wedding in India.
Well, let's take Sophie Mirabella. Well, let's take Sophie Mirabella's wedding.
No, well, I've given you a good example. Let me pick the example. She goes off to a wedding.
Well, the Mirabella example is more appropriate. That's more of what this is in line with what I mentioned.
Oh, so what are you now saying? Oh, the Mirabella one's not okay, but the one to India is okay.
No, I'm just using that as
an
example. And
who's going to decide that?
I'm just using that as an example. So a police officer, using that argument in relation to Sophie Mirabella's wedding, wouldn't it be appropriate for a police officer, hard-working police officer, I'm not saying politicians aren't hard-working, but a hard-working police officer going to the wedding of a fellow officer interstate and talking about policing at that wedding to claim that wedding on the public purse?
Well, it just shows you how ridiculous your proposition is, because what you're saying is, OK, we'll have a no to that one, but if a shadow minister for foreign affairs is invited to a wedding in India, which is a huge compliment and a great opportunity for that shadow to get to know people in India, a very important, country from Australia's point of view, that one would be okay, but that one wouldn't be. And then what are you going to do? You're going to have a bunch of bureaucrats deciding which weddings you can go to. I mean, seriously, how petty can you be?
But isn't this important in terms of encouraging trust and faith in politicians generally in the country? Because politicians aren't generally thought of particularly highly by the general population. And with all the expenses wrought story that's been going on over the past couple of years with different organisations, wouldn't this be a good opportunity to clear this up?
Look, this will never be cleared up. As you know, I've been the subject of this myself.
Yeah, you've had to repay tens of thousands of dollars from a phone card.
Well, I did, and I mean, there was fraud on my card. I only found out about it 5 years after it started, because the fraud fellow from Telstra rang me up and said, look, I've raised this with the Department of Finance. They've done nothing about it. You obviously don't know about it, so we thought we'd better tell you about it. And so, I mean, there's a classic case, but I don't want to go to my own personal circumstances.
But can we just get back to how the general population might see this? Like a hard-working police officer or teacher or whoever sees politicians going to a fellow MP's wedding and claiming it on the public purse. It seems like a bit of a rort.
Well, you can certainly make it out as a rort, which is clearly what's happening in the press now. And quite frankly, it always happens this way. I mean,
does that make it right? Does that make it right?
I consider this, courageous on my part, Joe, to even be here, because, you can never win these debates. They're always run against you. And you'll never satisfy people about it. And, I mean, the sort of strange thing here is, too, if people, the press carry on about this, they never said anything about...
It's not only the press carrying on about this, it's John Hewson.
Yeah, well, I don't agree with John. I mean, I think he's a great fellow, but I don't agree with him on this occasion.
You can't just dismiss it as an invention of the press.
Well, no, I don't do that entirely. That is true. But I think it's also true that the press love these stories and their front page, and they give it a huge run. And, because
the press are pursuing this because it goes to a matter of public trust in the politicians.
Well, that is true. And I think, and I'm all in favour of politicians being subject to the highest levels of scrutiny, provided it's reasonably, managed. But I think we both know it's often, very much exaggerated. And fortunately, the Australian public are not that stupid to, believe everything they read in the papers. I mean, this guy, I don't even know him. I know he was there when I was there. I think Bernie from Bernie Ripple. I mean, from what I've read in the paper this morning, it was just... evening up. We're going to attack the coalition, so we might as well attack some bloke on the Labor side. So, look, I'm all in favour of proper scrutiny. Don't get me wrong. I think it is important, and public trust is also important, and so therefore you've got to have reasonable systems in place. But just picking on weddings and saying, oh, we're going to have a special category, you can't go to weddings. Really, when you get into it,
they're not saying you can't go to weddings.
Well, yes, they are.
Just don't claim it on the taxpayer.
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, in future, he's not to go to weddings, apparently. That's the proposition.
Not to go to weddings, just not to claim expenses on them anyway. But anyway.
Right, so you're saying he cannot go, he basically he is not entitled to go as Prime Minister. That's what you're saying.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just putting forward different arguments that people are proposing.
I'm not arguing Tony's case one way or another.
Yeah.
But in the end, I mean, Prime Ministers and senior political figures are often invited to this sort of function. To me, they're social functions. They're often invited to all sorts of social functions, not just weddings. You know, you get to be taken to the footy or to the arts. I mean, the Minister for Arts goes. Are we going to say the Minister for the Arts can go to an arts function, but the Prime Minister shouldn't because it's just a personal benefit, so therefore he should pay? I think it's just nonsense, complete nonsense.
Okay, well, we may or may not hear a bit more about this. Peter Reid, thanks.
Well, we will, mate. It never goes away. It's a story. It's too good. When there's a vacuum, run the expenses argument.
Thanks for putting yourself forward, Peter Reid.
Okay.